Let's bring in our panel. Jonathan Turley is here, Byron York, Ben Domenech, and Jason Chaffetz. Jonathan, I want to start with you first. Here was Tulsi Gabbard in that White House press briefing room moments ago giving her top-line remarks on all of this. Listen.
There is irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true. It wasn't.
She also took questions in that room. Jonathan, now your top-line thoughts on what you just heard.
Well, this was a fascinating moment because this false narrative could not have been spread without the people in that room. And you saw the reaction of the journalists, and you can understand why. That is, these are the same people that expressed no interest in investigating these questions and just promulgated what was a false narrative. Now, we know that President Obama was told early on that Hillary Clinton was going to invent this Russian conspiracy theory, that her campaign was moving in that direction. And yet we find out now that even though the intelligence community rejected that assessment, they effectively quashed that assessment and ordered a new one and then leaked to the press information that was clearly false.
So, Jason, you were still in Congress when all of this went down. You left in 2017. We should also point out, by the way, that Caroline Leavitt was talking about the request from the Trump administration to unseal the grand jury testimony. Apparently, a federal judge in Florida just denied that request. More on that later. But what do you think about everything that we heard here in this briefing and the claims, it apparently backed up by this 2020 assessment from the House Intelligence Committee? That Barack Obama was behind this bogus conspiracy to try to tie Donald Trump's victory to Russian interference.
I cannot even express how stunning this is. The President of the United States was engaged in a conspiracy. That's the allegation. I'm so disappointed in Barack Obama. He puts himself up there as a scandal-free president. Now, look how great it was for 8 years. That guy, run the screen, he was lying to us. And he was part of concocting a conspiracy to deceive the American people. It doesn't get any worse than that. And how many times did I get a lecture from the Democrats about nobody's above the law, nobody's above the law? They all said it. They drove it home every time. And we'll see where they are now. They're going to run for the hills. And Jonathan Turley is right. He is absolutely right. Where is the intellectual curiosity? Where are they going to be in terms of returning their Pulitzer Prizes and all the awards that they won and patting themselves on the back on how great they were on getting Donald Trump? They were all lying to us, and they got snookered, and they should be held accountable. And I want to see some people in handcuffs. They have to be held accountable, or it'll happen again.
And now, Byron, to a moment where a reporter in that White House briefing room questioned Tulsi Gabbard on whether or not this implicates the former president in criminal behavior. Listen here.
Do you believe that any of this new information implicates former President Obama in criminal behavior?
We have referred and will continue to refer all of these documents to the Department of Justice and the FBI. To investigate the criminal implications of this.
For even former President Obama?
Correct. The evidence that we have found and that we have released directly point to President Obama leading the manufacturing of this intelligence assessment.
Another stunning moment. Byron, your reaction.
Well, we obviously know that a former president can be charged with crimes. That's been done before, so I have no idea what's going to happen with that. All President Trump said today about former President Obama is that President Trump, wants everyone to be held accountable. But this, as somebody who covered this from 2016 on, this is really huge news because what we found out today was that the intelligence community did not have any proof when it said that Vladimir Putin meddled in the U.S. election for the purpose of electing Donald Trump. They did not have that proof. Now, that accusation went on to be repeated by Democrats and people in the media thousands and thousands and thousands of times. It basically formed the basis of our political conversation for months at a time, and now we learn that it was false. Further, we learn that Barack Obama actually set this in motion, but this is going to, I think, cause a complete rethinking of much conventional wisdom about this. It's something that many of us who've covered it have known for quite a long time, but this is indisputable evidence that their statements were false.
And Ben, let me turn to you on this, because a couple of things, as Kelly O'Donnell was pointing out there in the briefing, the Supreme Court decision provides a certain amount of immunity. Somebody's doorbell's ringing for a couple of times. Go answer the door. I think Amazon's at the door. Sorry. The Supreme Court gives a certain amount of immunity to presidents for actions that they took while in office. Does Obama fall under this if everything that Tulsi Gabbard has said is true? And secondly, somebody else asked the question, Ben, earlier in the briefing, that Donald Trump was president when this report was published. It could have been declassified then, but wasn't. Speak to both of those things if you could.
Well, first off, I think that the question about immunity, and obviously I'm not an attorney, so I'll leave that to Jonathan and to the Department of Justice. I think that this is a very deeply important question to answer, just given the explosive nature of these allegations. And as someone who, wrote extensively about this and covered it along with Byron, there was a lot of suspicion around things like this at the time. There was skepticism among those of us who've doubted a lot of the claims coming from the intel community before. But nothing on this scale was really something that people conventionally believed. And it's truly insane that this did not come out before. It's something that I think we deserve to know a lot earlier in this process. And the fact that it took so long is, I think, really a miss on the first Trump administration, that they didn't give this to us at the time. But also, I think this is one of the reasons why Tulsi Gabbard was named to that position at DNI, because she was going to go after and pursue these types of things doggedly. And that's one of the reasons why I think that we have such a revelatory moment today in Washington, and one that's going to have consequences for all time to come.
Interesting you bring that up, because she was asked about that, Ben, in the room, Tulsi Gabbard. And Jonathan, I'll take this to you. She was asked why the prior DNA under the first presidency, Trump presidency, didn't declassify these docs at that time. Listen.
I can't speak to what happened there. There were several DNIs under the first Trump administration. President Trump faced many challenges from those who were working in the government who sought to undermine his presidency.
Any thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, I think Tulsa put it well. The fact is, for those of us who were involved in different aspects of the first term in the media or in Congress, that was a real dog pile. The minute he came into office, he faced this investigation that consumed much of it. They were successful. These are media figures who were looking for a Russian conspiracy. This is it, and you were part of it. That is, the Russian conspiracy was to seed this false narrative that would consume the first Trump term. And it worked. But it wouldn't have worked without the people in that room. You'll notice how they fervently refused, despite Tulsa's efforts, to address the evidence that she just released. That's consistent with what they did during the first term. They weren't interested in looking at evidence that contradicted the narrative. They're still not interested, because it implicates not just these high-level officials, it implicates them.
And Jason, just to finish this off here, what the Director of National Intelligence was detailing here, is laid out again in this House Intelligence report, is that there was plenty of evidence that Putin wanted to undermine confidence in the American electoral system, but that he assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win, because it certainly looked to him like that was going to happen. And that what he was going to do was he was going to save what he thought was some very juicy intelligence for if Hillary Clinton was elected, or when she was elected, to try to undermine her presidency. And yet, according to this report, everything started pushing in early December in a completely different direction.
Yeah, I think everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and I think that's it actually provides the motive that James Comey, as the FBI director, put them things into motion when he put them into motion. I think those are all questionable now. Let's remember that the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, at the time at the Department of Justice, recommended prosecution of people that were leaking things to the media, and the Department of Justice said no. He recommended many times to do those types of things. He even recommended to prosecute the number 2 person, McCabe, at the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, again, said no. So there was a lot of action that was going on behind the scenes. But remember, you had an Obama administration and later a Biden administration did everything they could to bury that and allow people like me. I was the chairman of the Oversight Committee. They would not provide these documents, and that deep state continued on in perpetuity to hide that information that was clearly asked under subpoena and never did happen. And that's just fundamentally wrong. And all these Democrats on their high horse telling us about how they got to save democracy. You lying sack. I can't say it at this hour, but I'm telling you, it is so infuriating because they lied to us. And
Jason,
they should pay the price.
You know
no
what?
more free passes.
Hold that thought, because we're going to have more after the break. We'll stand you all by. We'll have more reaction when we return.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.